across another article recently. This time the author claims they have 5 questions that will stump atheists. I'm willing to give this one a go. Let's see who's going to challenge and change my worldview. We should remember that there is a difference between stumping an atheist and leaving them speechless. They will flounder, make things up, call you names, etc. But it is very easy to stump them. In this article, I will lay out 5 ways to stump an atheist. Okay, those are the rules, I guess. No floundering, no making things up, and no name calling. I'll do my best to abide by all of them.
I'm sure that we can handle this situation maturely, just like the responsible adults that we are. Isn't that right, Mr. Poopy Pants?
Okay, no more after that. Okay, one more.
For me, you're somewhere between a cockroach and that white stuff that accumulates at the corner of your mouth when you're really thirsty.
That's it. Out of my system.
Your mother was a hamster and your father smelt of elderberry.
Now, when I answer your questions, I won't resort to any of that. Ask how they know that God has no reasons for allowing evil. Atheists like to say that if God did exist, there would be no evil and suffering. But how do they know that? They suggest that since God is omnipotent and loving, he would stop evil. But what if he had perfectly good reasons to allow it? If I am clipping a dog's nails, they may think I am torturing them from their limited perspective. But I have perfectly good reasons for allowing them to go through pain and suffering. The same when a child gets a shot. The parent knows they are going through pain and suffering, but allows it for a greater good. I suggest that it is possible that God has reasons for allowing pain and suffering. How do they know he does not? This is the problem of evil, or the Epicurean argument. The basic premise is this: evil exists. But if God is both good and all-powerful, then he could prevent evil. Therefore, God does not exist. However, this is not a good argument for atheism in general. You could postulate a God that is not good, either evil or neutral. This would answer the argument and still leave open the possibility of a God or gods existing. It does, however, argue favorably against a certain idea of God. That is, one that is supposedly both good and all-powerful. The original poster's argument that sometimes evil is necessary for the greater good. Shut it! He used the example of a doctor giving a child a shot, which causes pain, but is good for them in the long run. The problem with this is the doctor, who is not an omnipotent being, is limited in what they can do. Let's take another medical example, an infected limb. In the past, amputation would be needed to halt the spread of infection. Now, we can take antibodies for a host of infections to keep them from spreading or kill them off completely. So, as our medical knowledge increased, we can cause less pain and do more good. An omnipotent being, by definition, could figure out a way to do all good without causing any pain at all. And a good being would, also by definition, try to do that. But since this is not how the observable world exists, we can conclude that either God cannot help, will not help, or most likely does not exist at all. Ask what they would accept as evidence for God's existence. Atheists usually say that they are just sitting around waiting for evidence for God's existence. When evidence is presented, they will believe. Since there is no evidence, they refuse to believe. But David Silverman seemed to suggest there is no evidence that he would accept. I asked him, what is the difference between a God of the gaps argument and a deductive argument leading to the conclusion that God exists? He said they were the same thing. Silverman does not accept deductive arguments leading to the conclusion that God exists. He sweeps them under the rug, hastily labeling them God of the gaps. Christopher Hitchens similarly said there is nothing that would change his mind. But how can you ask me to provide evidence if you do not know what you are asking for? So what would you accept as evidence? Atheists are not the one making the positive claim, so it's not up to us to provide evidence. Evidence can come from a myriad of sources, but it's up to the person trying to persuade the existence of something to provide some evidence. If you look at the sun, we have no way of determining what it's made of. Surprisingly, it was quite difficult to send a party up there to collect sun samples. The best hypothesis we had was that it was hydrogen, but there was no evidence for that. Then there was the development of spectroscopy, the discovery that light from elements will not show up when that light is refracted in a prism. This provided the evidence that the chemical composition of the sun was indeed mainly hydrogen. Now, let's take that to the God argument. In the early 1800s, it's very doubtful that the people who did not believe the sun was composed of hydrogen would have said, if you can present to me the pattern of light from a sun on a prism that conforms to the light that comes from hydrogen, then that would be proof for me. It was the people that made the claim that needed to find some kind of evidence, something that had not been thought up and presented before. Those who don't believe the claim are under no obligation to say what evidence would be needed, because they are not the ones making any claims about the subject. We can say, if you can do this, it would prove it to me, but there is no obligation for the non-believer in any subject, God, evolution, anything, to define what form evidence should take. But there is an obligation for them, if they want to be intellectually honest, to truthfully evaluate any evidence presented to them. Ask if they would believe in miracles if they saw one. David Hume suggested that if a wise man is to see a miracle, he ought not believe in it. That seems to be the stance of the modern atheists. Thinking themselves intellectual elites, They will ask questions like, why cannot God heal amputees? The suggestion is that the miracle workers roaming around are just playing magic tricks, but real miracles, like the healing of an amputee, cannot happen. So if the atheists saw a miracle, they would not believe it. If there was cold, hard evidence of the supernatural right before their eyes, they would still find a way to deny it. A friend of mine told me that if the clouds randomly formed the sentence, the Bible is God's word, he would still not believe it. This is not rational skepticism, it is outright denialism. That is what atheism is. Yet they do not want to admit that, so ask them, would you believe in miracles if you saw one? Miracles are things that go against our understanding of the natural world. So, by their own definition, wow, using that phrase a lot today, miracles cannot occur. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the things that we would find miraculous cannot happen. They have, many times in the past. But when they have been observed, proven, and understood, then our knowledge of the world has changed, meaning they are no longer miracles. A little over 100 years ago, people claimed it would be impossible to have heavier-than-air flight. Then a pair of bicycle shop owners were able to create a device to take them from the air from one point to another. To outside observers, that was miraculous because they didn't have an understanding of lift that we have in our current knowledge of the world. It's no longer a miracle now, and honestly, commonplace, because we understand how it happens. If I saw a miracle, something that was unexplainable by our knowledge of science, like, say, an ashtray thrown in the air and was just hanging there, then I would ask myself first, am I really seeing this? Could I be wrong, or hallucinating? Could this be a trick? Could I confirm that the miracle I was observing was really there? Then the next question would be, what does this mean for science? What new observations and theories do we need to account for this? And what has now been falsified because of it? Oh, and as far as I can understand, Hume's argument about miracles is that we shouldn't blindly accept any claims about them occurring, which is a rational reaction to outlandish claims without any evidence. I also find it in very poor taste that you use amputees in your questions about stumping people. Ask them if the cause of nature could be natural. The atheist will usually want to say that everything in the universe can be explained in natural terms. But what about nature itself? A man cannot be his own father. Nature cannot cause itself. It did not exist prior to its existence. Before nature existed, it had no causal properties. Therefore, there must have been a cause beyond nature to bring it into existence. The cause of nature, therefore, must be supernatural. Nature could not have caused itself to exist any more than a man could be his own father. So ask the atheist if the cause of nature could be natural. This is a misunderstanding of definitions. Just because nature and natural sound the same does not mean they are the same things. Nature, in a scientific context, just means things that exist, and natural is a description of how things react to one another in reality. A natural explanation of existence simply means that said existence happened in a non-supernatural way. There is no claim that nature caused itself to exist. The only argument for an atheist is there is no evidence for an intelligent creator being as the cause of the universe. We don't know what the cause of the universe is. If we do figure it out, it may require a complete change in our view of how the universe works. But currently, there is no proof that it was an intelligence that was this cause. Ask if they believe that people who do bad things deserve to be punished. This is something that everybody acknowledges. People who do bad things deserve to be punished. Yet this is also the foundation for the doctrine of hell. People who do bad things come under God's condemnation. If a court judge were to just free man, he would be a corrupt and an immoral judge. God is not a corrupt or immoral judge. He must punish people for doing bad things. In answering this question in the affirmative, they are conceding the rationale for the doctrine of hell. So ask them if they believe that people who do bad things deserve to be punished. Yes, I do believe that people who do bad things should be punished. But we don't live in Shouldland.
Ah, Shouldland, where clean-cut kids cruise Shouldland Boulevard, and the Shouldland High football team gets their optimistic asses kicked by their crosstown rival, Reality Check Tech.
Sometimes people do bad things and get away with it. That doesn't mean I have to like it, but my desires do not dictate how the universe is ordered. As much as I think people should be punished for any crimes they commit, that does not mean a hell does exist. Just that would be desirable if you think that would be an appropriate punishment. As for the idea of infinite punishment and torture for finite crimes, with a lock 'em up and throw away the key mentality, that does not seem to be just or moral to me in any way. So, there you go. Wasn't stumped by your questions when answering them. I didn't resort to floundering, making things up, or calling you names. Well, I answered them at least. Hopefully that was good enough for you.
Let's get